Hey people, this is Jake, bringing another YouTube video. I know I usually do Percy Jackson related stuff, but that is not what we are doing today. Today, I wanted to talk to you guys about a really good trilogy that I finished a couple weeks ago. And that trilogy is the Broken Empire trilogy by Mark Lawrence. And this is a high fantasy trilogy that is awesome, in my point of view. But I want to tell you guys about it, see maybe get some people interested in it, if this is something you may think you think you might like. So yeah, here we go. Alright, I'm going to be honest with you guys. I just spent like the last hour or so, I kind of lost track of time, I did like 10 takes trying to explain to you, and trying to explain all this. But this is an extremely complex trilogy, and I'm not very good at talking, so I'm going to kind of cheat right now. I don't know if this is like bad or anything, but I'm going to read a couple Goodreads comments that I feel explain this better than I could and have tried. So something that will interest you guys is Rick Riordan has actually written Goodreads reviews for each of these books, and he gave them all 5 stars, and the stuff he says I agree with very much so. And so I'm gonna read this his first Goodreads comment on The Prince of Thorns, which is the first book. And he writes a little like very kind of brief plot summary, and also a couple just comments about it as well that I totally agree with, and I think would interest you guys a little bit. So what he says, Rick Riordan says, is, I've heard of dark fantasy and anti-heroes, but this is the darkest fantasy with the anti-hero I've ever encountered. Our protagonist, Jorg, is only 13, but do not mistake this for a kid's book. Jorg is already the leader of a cutthroat gang of marauders and has killed more men than most seasoned warriors, including innocent civilians and a few of his own followers. Despite all this, I found myself rooting for Jorg, especially as most of his past is revealed, and we learn why he has become such a hardened and unrepentant killer. He lives in a broken empire where minor lords are constantly squabbling, but who is really pulling the strings of power? Jorg intends to find out. He aims to become king by the time he's 15, and once you meet him, you won't be betting against him. If you've ever wanted to read a first-person book about a hero who is also the darkest of villains, try this out. It's not like anything I've ever read before. And on top of that, Robin Hobb, if you're a fantasy fan, you have probably heard of her because she's written a ton of good books. I actually haven't read any of them. I will soon because one of them is on my shelf. But she says, and I also agree with this very well, which is why I'm reading it, says, I had to grit my teeth several times to get through this. And more than once I wondered, why was this recommended to me? Then the pieces began to fall into place, and it is not a tale for the faint of heart, but well worth it to prevail, trust me. So I hope that's not really cheating to read authors' Goodreads comments that are like way better spoken than I am. But those 2 quotes right there, it sums it up perfectly. There are going to be times where you're kind of wondering why you're reading it. But then you're going to read a little more, and then everything's going to fall into place, and you're going to be like, oh, that's why I'm reading it. Because, like Rick Riordan says, it's not about some golden hero. Jorg Ankrath, who is the protagonist of the series, is not your typical awesome dude hero. He's a guy that has goals, has ambition, and he's going to do what it takes to achieve that. He has a very complicated past, the very complicated storyline, but one that will be explained with perfection by Mark Lawrence and will work together cohesively in a very, very, very good way. I don't want to go too much into detail because I don't want to spoil anything, but that is the gist of it. It is a story that will definitely keep you wondering, and it will build off itself very well, and the ending will blow your mind. And it has some of the best quotes. If you're into quotes like whatsoever, and if you will have some from here. Here's just like 4 that I thought were really good that I thought you guys might want to hear. So because one of the things is this is a first-person point of view book under Jorg Ankrath's point of view, and his philosophy, the way he sees things. This is honestly like this book is it's got good plot. It's got good characters. It's super complex. It's got cool fight scenes. It's got cool strategy. A little romance here and there. Got really cool. It's got everything. But the best part about this for me is just seeing Jorg Ancraft's philosophy like firsthand. Seeing the way he thinks about things. Because this is a guy that is very dark. He's gone through a bunch of shit, but he's not a lunatic. You know, he's not a psychopath. He knows who he is. He's very self-aware. And he knows what's going on around him. And he will admit to you when he's being petty, or when he's being stupid, or when this guy's got the upper hand, or when he's afraid, or when he's scared. You know, that's the same thing. But when he's afraid, when he doesn't think he can win, but he's just rolling the dice. All these things. And like Game of Thrones, third person. But it's very good. But this first person, I feel like it's a really good way to look through it and just to see his point of view on everything, see his philosophy. Definitely the best part of the story for me, which I don't think is something you get from most books. Usually the best part's the plot, character development, all those things. But just seeing things through his mind, definitely the best part for me. So one of those quotes here is, "Hate will keep you alive where love fails. The biggest lies we say for ourselves. There's no sound more annoying than the chatter of a child, and none more sad than the silence they leave when they are gone." And I really, really like this one. This is loud. "This is where the wise man turns away. This is where the holy kneel and call on God. These are the last miles, my brothers. Don't look to me to save you. Don't think I will not spend you. Run if you have the wit. Pray if you have the soul. Stand your ground if courage is yours, but don't follow me. Follow me, and I will break your heart." Pretty deep stuff from a pretty deep dude in a pretty deep trilogy. So if you guys are not into brutal stuff, if you're not into savage stuff and all this, if you just want a story that you can fully love the protagonist, like if you just like protagonists that you can look up to as a role model and all that stuff, you won't like this. And that's totally fine. I'm not saying you're a weakling or whatever, or that everyone will like this. There's definitely some people that this book is not for. And I feel like if you're reading this and if it's not for you, you can tell right away. But if you're like me and you wanted something a little different, you wanted something a little more brutal, you wanted something a little more deep, a little more savage, all that stuff. Something a little more that kind of blurs the lines between right and wrong and all that shit. This is definitely a trilogy for you. And a trilogy that I would highly, highly, highly recommend. As well as Rick Riordan would highly recommend. It's definitely a good one. It got great quotes, got all this stuff. One thing I want to say before I ramble on anymore is the Prince of Thorns. This is the first book. I definitely think this is by far the worst of the trilogy, which is kind of a bummer because of the first one. And I could foresee a lot of people when they read this, they may not want to go further. Because definitely the biggest con I would have for this series is there is a lot of ridiculous things that happen. There's a lot of things that are kind of like, you know, that's the best way you could handle that situation. And that's definitely the most prevalent in this book. But it's still a good book. You still got Jorg's philosophy. You still got all this stuff. One of the things is Jorg is definitely the least likable in this book. But if you can get through this book and you're seeing, you kind of see some things you like. Maybe you like this character. Or you see some promise in these areas. Think the plot line's interesting. You like the storyline, the medieval kind of type world and all this stuff. Definitely go on. Because like if you totally hate it, then obviously if you hate everything about it, then don't move on. I'm not going to tell you to do that. But if there is some stuff you like about this, definitely move on. Because King of Thorns and Emperor of Thorns are beautiful books. Very good. My personal favorite is King of Thorns. Emperor of Thorns is extremely good as well. That's something I really want to tell you guys. Just like Robin Hood says, there's going to be times you're going to have to push through. But if you do, if you like it at all, you're really going to be happy because it's a very well written trilogy. And I kind of feel like I've rambled, but there is these books are so complex. But don't mistake complex for like density. So I feel like a lot of times when you hear that, you think of, oh, well, this is going to be a drag to read and a lot of detail I'm going to have to push through. There is detail. There is some density at times. Like I said, it's very complex. There's a lot of things going on at once. But the way it's very, very beautifully well written. Everything will come together at the end. Even though there's a lot of stuff going on, it's going to keep you on your toes. And it will definitely, it's not like an incredibly dense book that is just a labor 24/7 to get through. It's very well written, fast paced, very detailed when it needs to be, very well crafted. Highly, highly recommend it. That was my kind of review, thoughts, rambles about the Broken Empire trilogy. I'm not an expert book reviewer. I'm not trying to be. My main goal here was to get some people excited about it. If you're looking for something different, something a little brutal, and if you like fantasy at all, definitely a good trilogy to get into. It's it's not like a huge endeavor. Each book's like 400 pages. It's not going to take you forever to read. Very, very good trilogy if you guys want to give it a try. One thing, it is high fantasy, it is adult, it's not for kids. So if you're really young or something and you just want to read, like, if you're only allowed to like read PG and stuff like that, which is that was totally me for like forever. There's no shame in that. Don't read this now. Wait a few years, then read it. There's not like a ton of sex scenes, but there is some sexual content here and there. There is some cuss words here. It's not like everywhere you go. It's not like ridiculous. I probably wouldn't read it if it was that bad. But there is a little here and there. So if you don't want to get into that, totally no shame. Just a little disclaimer. It is high fantasy. It is adult. But if it's not like over the top. So if you're okay with that, definitely a good trilogy to get into. And I definitely recommend it. Thank you guys for listening to me. I know I kind of ramble and all that stuff, but I hope you guys can follow along a little bit. And if you have read it, or if you end up reading it, or if you're going to and you want to talk to me about it in the comments, that would be cool. But anyway, I hope you guys have a great day, and thanks for listening.